Court that his apology be accepted. Put the recommendation. All in favour? Those against? Carried. Now we have the adoption of the previous minutes held on the 10th of July 2019. Do we have any, somebody like to move those minutes? Moved Councillor Whipper and seconded Councillor Marquardt. Any discussion? Put them. All in favour? Against? Carried. Declarations of interest.
Yes.
Do we have Councillor Mr. Pepping?
Through the Mayor, I have a declaration of interest into item 17.2, notice of rescission motion 3/2019, DA 19/0387, Seniors Housing Development 2, Orchard Street, Colovale. It is a non-pecuniary interest significant, as I have relations that live in the proximity of the development. I'll vacate the chamber when that matter is discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Pepping. Any further declarations? No further declarations. There is no mayoral minute, so we move on to public forum. 17.2, notice of rescission of motion 32019, DA 190387, Seniors Housing Development 2, Orchard Street, Colovale. Mr. Carl Bashan will address Council into support of this recommendation. Thank you. You have 5 minutes, and there'll be, because it's public forum, you know there'll be no questions.
Understood.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, councillors. Today's rescission motion gives you the opportunity to correct an error made in the determination of DA 190837. You should never have been put in the position of making an unlawful determination, yet that is exactly what happened. Blame has been placed on the state government for the Wingecarribee LEP and the R2 zoning that permits seniors housing, yet the state government also put in black and white a checks and balances clause in the senior SEP to ensure that seniors housing is not placed in inappropriate areas. This is Schedule 1 of the senior SEP. Under Schedule 1, 2 Orchard Street, Colovale, fails on 2 accounts, drinking catchment and rural fire. We are also in contact with Water New South Wales and challenging the validity of the issued concurrence for DA 190837. This should be the end of DA 19/0837. We have also been misinformed that if you don't use the senior SEP, then there are no other controls. This is not true. We all agree that if I place a Ferrari label on my Mazda, it does not become a Ferrari, no matter how much I would like it to be true. Just as placing seniors housing label on a multi-dwelling residential flat building does not make it seniors housing. Thus, DA 190837 in its true form is exposed as a multi-dwelling residential flat building requiring an R3 zoning. Therefore, the Wingecarribee LEP applies and DA 190837 is prohibited. This should be the end of DA 190837. At this point, there should be no doubt in your mind that an error was made on the 10th of July. But in case there is doubt, DA 190837 was not notified as per the rules of the EPNA Act, and as it states in the EPNA Act, a determination must not be made without the clearly defined notification process completed. Councillors, this is another reason that the determination on the 10th of July was unlawful/invalid. The question that needs to be answered is, if DA 190837 had merit, then why was it notified during the EPNA Act defined exclusion period of Christmas and New Year's? This should be the end of DA 190837 as it stands. This has been upheld in the Land Environment Court on numerous occasions and exposes council to a Class 4 appeal, which we are pursuing. With limited time and information, I did a cursory assessment of DA 190837 and found it riddled with many failings and negatives. Too many to list today. I emailed you a small number of my findings. I actually thought it possible for the applicant to be given the opportunity for a redesign, but as the regulations stand, this would be unlawful. Therefore, the seniors housing DA 190837 should be refused in any form, as it clearly states in Schedule 1 of the SEP, it does not apply in the Colovale area. It is painfully clear and obvious that no other determination can be made. No rules should be bent or broken for DA 190837. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. We now move to the first item on the business paper, 8.1, page 3, Berrima, draft Berrima Marketplace Master Plan, and Mr Derek White will address council in support of this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good afternoon, councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you this afternoon on a subject dear to my heart. I have been involved in the efforts to get an all-abilities upgrade for the Berrima Marketplace Playground for over 2 years now. Ever since one of my fellow Berrima District Rotary Club members had the bright idea that this would be a good project for us to take on. Thank you, Alan Cupid. This project is a classic example of the old adage about little acorns begetting big oak trees. Our first step involved getting a friend of mine from Sydney to prepare a concept plan, which we used to consult widely with the Southern Highlands community, and particularly those in Berrima. And then we used it to obtain a grant of $30,000 from the New South Wales Government under the Community Building Partnerships Program. Now, as anyone who knows anything about playgrounds would realise, that is a relative drop in the ocean in playground development terms. However, as I told Prue Goward when she handed me the cheque, it would be a great bit of seed capital for us to find more funds to do what had to be done. Building on this start, we then worked hand in hand with Council to obtain a $240,000 additional grant from the state government under the Stronger Country Community Scheme. Then we were really able to get serious. Since then, we have worked closely with the WSC Assets team to come up with a suitable plan of action for the marketplace, with an early focus on the playground upgrade. This has involved further extensive community consultation, a site conference or two, and a number of iterations of the concept plan to try to accommodate issues raised along the way. This has proved to be a particular challenge given the strong heritage values that prevail in the Berrima area. I think we have done a pretty good job in that regard with the helpful input of a variety of heritage consultants. While not everybody will be entirely happy with the final product, it preserves the heritage ambience without compromising the key objectives. In conclusion, I would like to indulge that strange propensity of engineers, a love of facts. The facts here are: Berrima is a premium tourist destination that attracts a large number of visitors, many of whom use the marketplace facilities. Whatever the heritage situation is, there is already a very popular playground in the marketplace. This playground is currently not accessible to or usable by young people with disabilities. The current marketplace amenities have a disabled toilet, but no suitable access routes for the disabled. The Council's own development strategy and the New South Wales Government planning requirements both dictate that playgrounds must be made accessible to those with disabilities. And a number of disability-related organisations in the Southern Highlands have expressed their strong support for such an upgrade. We have $270,000 burning a hole in the Council's pocket just begging for a sod to be turned on this project, and we will lose that money back to the state general revenue if nothing happens soon. Therefore, I think it is not just highly desirable but imperative that the Council approves this project today and get on with making it happen. I urge you all to vote yes. Thank you for your time.
Stay there.
Stay there? Oh, okay.
Thank you. Is there any questions in relation to a visitor item?
Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yep.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. White, and congratulations. My question is quite simple. 2 years down the road, now that you've been through it, looking back in hindsight, what would you do differently?
Not started.
Don't tell us that.
No, I think we've done pretty well. I mean, we've consulted widely, we've had a lot of feedback, and we've tried very hard to accommodate those.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. And
Thank you.
anything else?
Thank you. No other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. Thank you, councillors. It has, as just been pointed out, been a long project, and I think an introduction is should be worthy of it. Mr. Wilton.
Michelle.
Ms. Green, through the General Manager.
Thank you. Oh, I have to stop. Thank you. Thank you, through the Chair. I was contacted this morning by Stuart Reid from the Heritage team from New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet. He was contacted yesterday regarding concerns that the office had not been consulted as part of the draft master plan. I contacted Stuart and advised him that as the marketplace was not a state listed item, that was not necessary. However, I also explained the process of developing the master plan, the fact that the conservation management strategy was a key input to the master plan, and that Council's heritage staff, Peter Kabila and Lucinda Varley, had been consulted during the development of the master plan. I also reiterated Council's strong commitment to preserving the heritage values of the Berrima marketplace, and that a DA would be required for this project and further consultation would occur during that process. I spoke also to Eric Savage from the Berrima Residents Association today and clarified with Eric that the stone pines were not going to be replaced with a deciduous tree. It seemed to be that was the impression that the Berrima Residents Association had obtained from the documentation, but that is not the intent. Councillors, the listed trees proposed for the replacement are the stone pine, the maritime pine, Queensland pine, swamp cypress and the Douglas fir, and they will only occur as the existing trees fail. Another point of contention seems to be the proposed copse of deciduous trees to the north of both the eastern and the western side of the marketplace. This was included in the 2007 Conservation Management Strategy, and that's why it has been included in the master plan that's before you today. However, after speaking with Stuart Reid from New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet, it seems that may be an opportune time to review this document. He has made comment that perhaps copses of trees were not around during that Victorian era, and that perhaps it would be worthwhile investigating that some more. We did, as I said, have a heritage consultant involved, but perhaps trees are not, were not drilled down, and the actual existing 2007 Conservation Management Strategy was not to be reviewed as part of this process. So, therefore, the Premier Department did indicate their strong support for the master plan that is before you today, particularly the playground, with the possibility of adopting that and perhaps reviewing the tree plan separately, should you wish.
Thank you, Ms Green. Is there any questions from councillors? No, you escaped unscathed, Ms Green. Thank you very much for that. I think it's cleared up a little bit of comments from within the public and councillors. Councillors?
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr Mayor.
Recommendation as printed
Or, well, no, as a point 4 that Ms Green just spoke to, with regard to.
Do we have that? Do we have that up?
Yeah, except for the tree. It's there actually. It's actually there, Mr Mayor. Except for the tree preservation plan, as Ms Green just so we get the. In case there's any, that just needs to be put into point 4, I think, and then I think it works.
Okay, subject to that. That is the motion. It's not the motion that's in the business paper. It's the motion that's now on the screen. Do you
scroll down just a little bit so I can
Yep.
read that?
When somebody has read it and is happy to second it, will you please?
Was your point, Councillor, was your point to further negotiations with the New South Wales Heritage Office around the landscaping? Is that what it was?
Council take further community
Yes.
consultation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's there. Okay. I'm happy to see that.
Look, I think it.
Okay, seconded Councillor Whipper.
Oh,
You
quickly
can
speak to
speak
it,
to
Mr
it.
Mayor, and congratulations again. I think that's this is a great opportunity for us grandparents to take our kids to an even better spot, and especially for those people, as you pointed out, kids with disabilities. I think that's very relevant that we have that. So I'm glad that a community benefit has come out, Mr Mayor, from a local group like this, the local
Rotary.
Club, to raise this and go forward. As pointed out, it is a very sensitive heritage area, and why not take the time just to make sure, as Ms Green suggested earlier, that we do have maybe a look at the review of the tree planting so it doesn't detract from maybe the historic plantings or what is seen could have been the Georgian plantings of the time. So, and there has been comment from people in the community about this, but I think in general it's been well accepted, and I think that's fine. Look, I don't think it's a great problem. I'm sure that once that's sorted out, that the trees will be no problem. So, yeah, I'm happy to. I'm hoping councils will support that. I don't think it's a great. No, okay. We'll see where it goes.
No, I'd like to move an amendment, Mr Mayor. And
Councillor
my
Nelson.
amendment will be the recommendation as printed in the business paper. If I've got a seconder.
Secondly, Councillor Andrews. So the amendment is as printed.
So I'll be speaking for the amendment against the
Against the motion.
Against the motion. Look, the staff have done an incredible job to get this underway, and there's grant funding at stake, and we need to get on with this. Rotary Club have put in a huge amount of work, staff have put in a huge amount of work. We now need to get on with it, and the reason we need to get on with it is because one person in the 11th hour has rung up about trees that they don't quite comply with heritage. Now, give me a break, Mr Mayor. The officer explaining the situation is saying, and I heard the words, perhaps we should, perhaps, maybe we should. I'm saying, let's not perhaps we should. Let's get on with the job. Let's go with this. Let's get the grant funding. Let's put the shovel in the ground and get going, Mr Mayor. Because all we're going to do now is just talk about what happened 200 years ago, what type of trees were there to fit in with the heritage at the time. I mean, give me a break, Mr Mayor, the trees 200 years ago. And they've already said that the trees are only going to be replaced when the existing ones die. So, we're going to be years down the track when we do this. We've even gone to the Premier's Department now consulting about this, who said perhaps we should. Let's not perhaps, let's move on with it. And a couple of other things about the development was that the convict artwork and sculptures were taken out of the proposal, and at the time I thought, that's not, I think they were okay, but I asked a mother with children and she said, no, that type of artwork, it's probably not appropriate when young children are playing in the area. She said the artwork could be conceived to be sinister. So I'm happy that the artwork's taken out, but the people of Berrima have decided to tone down the colours. But the mother said at the same time, if you're having a playground, you need colour there. But we can't have the colour because we've got to comply with the Berrima colour code. So, come on, Mr Mayor, let's get on with it. And I ask the councillors to change from the motion and approve the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Markward, I'm going for or against?
Can I ask
So-
for a point of clarification? First,
You can have a clarification.
Just can I have a second?
Clarification.
If I can.
Yep.
Thanks, sir. I don't want to hold this project up.
No.
The question,
yes.
the clarification is, deferring consulting with the community over the tree will it hold up the project? That's my question.
Thank you. Through you, General Manager, to Ms Green.
Don't be polite.
The intention would be to adopt the master plan without pages 9 and 10, I believe it is, and then lodge the DA. That would be... If the master plan was adopted without the tree management plan, we could still proceed with the playground.
Thank you.
So, Councillor Whipper.
I'm speaking for the motion.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, well, look, I don't know what this little performance is about because quite clearly this is not going to hold anything up. What it's doing is just recognising the unique value of Berrima. I mean, anybody who can't see that Berrima is somewhat different, it's somewhat been referred to as a June, the crown, the jewel in the crown, and we market that. Why wouldn't we just take a breath, stop, think about it? All we're talking about is the landscaping plan here. I'm a little bit surprised personally that the New South Wales Heritage Office weren't contacted until today. That's a flaw, I believe, in the consultation process, but Ms Green explained that that's been rectified, that communication's taken place, and we're moving forward. So, as far as I see it, everybody's in favour of this, and the motion reflects that. Why would we create any division on the floor of a motion that's going to be endorsed by council? I mean, this is just bloody mindedness. I don't know whether this mother lived in Berrima who was offended by the lack of colour, or
through the chair.
no, or or the fact that convict heritage would offend people. I mean, that's I know they've taken it out, but the point is, there's a lot of people who live in Berrima that have maintained that village for future generations. They've invested a lot of their own resources, money, their time, their energy, their effort. They've raised, I believe, concerns that are valid. And it's in relation, in this instance, to the planting of trees. Those parks out there, those open spaces are quite unique, particularly with those cedar trees and the pines. That's really unique. Now, why wouldn't we make sure that the landscape master plan reflects the heritage value of the property? I mean, though the marketplace's not listed as a heritage item, the whole village is in the context of a heritage item. We can't ignore that. So I find this to be a little bit mischievous to put an amendment up, which is basically not doing anything other than proving a point based on a personal opinion. I think, councillors, we've got to support the motion and get on with it and put due process in place so those residents of Berrima can have a say in relation to the DA, and it'll go ahead. Simple. Why not be unanimous on this?
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Markward.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you. I'd first of all like to acknowledge Rotary's involvement in all this, the initiative. Sorry. I'd like to thank Rotary for their initiative here. I think it's a great step forward, and I applaud that. I'd also like to thank the staff for basically having a very thorough consultative process. There's been a lot of feedback, and the community has given that feedback, and it's been taken into account. So I'm happy to go with the motion as it stands, with the changes today, simply because it does reflect the view of Berrima. I personally disagree with a couple of things there, but I don't live in Berrima, and it's not my playground. I prefer brighter colours in playgrounds, but I don't think that's a reason to actually hold this up or cause any division in the council per se. So I'll be supporting the motion as it stands. I guess I don't really have much more to add. It's a playground for Berrima and for the visitors to Berrima, and I think they should have some say on that. But personally, I disagree with a couple of them, but that's not relevant. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Andrew.
Just briefly, thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Nelson went through all the points that I would have liked to speak about, including the muted colours. I'm not a fan of that, but that wouldn't change my attitude or mind. There's been only, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure there's only been one individual that found a problem with part of the landscaping here. To me, that it beggars belief, truly, to not let this go through in its entirety. So I will be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Then before you have the right to sum up, Councillor McLaughlin. Look, I'll go with the motion on this. I could have quite easily supported the amendment. The big thing is it won't hold up the project. If it were going to anyway delay the project, I'd support the amendment. How the main thing is that the landscaping plan be brought back. You haven't got a time frame there, Councillor McLaughlin. I don't want to see this to be held up and then deferred because of this, that and the other. So
Certainly not.
I would suggest that perhaps you look at putting what you think would be very much an appropriate landscape that plan that may or may not be changed, because even though I'm voting against it, Councillor Nelson made a very relevant point, and that is the trees are not going to be replaced or changed or whatever until one of them dies. Now, they've been there for 100 and whatever years.
Plenty of time then.
There's
Mr. Mayor.
plenty of time, but there is also plenty of time not to stop this project.
Not stopping it.
And the Rotary who have been working on this started from an idea. They put in for a community grant last year, if I remember correctly, and it was refused because it wasn't quite ready. The design and everything hadn't been done. So they've got there, they've worked hard. And if you don't put a time frame up there that the landscaping plan come back to council endorsement within the motion, then I might just go with the
You
amendment.
put it in, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy for you.
Well, you two work out what you
Okay.
think's a fair
All right.
time.
Do we look at the staff and that advice?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I don't
Okay.
think it comes back next week.
Okay,
Is that
then,
possible?
well, I think there should be certainty that this is not a deferring tactic.
No,
So
it's
can we have a clarification, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor. I think it should be done as an amendment to the 2007 Conservation Management Strategy, not just a landscaping plan. The whole Conservation Management Strategy should be reviewed. It's dated 2007, so it would be timely to review that whole document and incorporate the new tree species, but that in turn won't hold up the project. It could be treated as a new Conservation Management Strategy adopted, and then those 2 pages as an addendum to the master plan.
Okay,
I
and
would
what
say-
what would that take? How long?
I would say 6 to 12 months, because it's the whole heritage aspect of it needs to be done by a specialised person. It's certainly not something that it could be done quicker, I would imagine, but the document is 2007. It's not a huge document, but it would need to be reviewed by a
I'd go to
specialist.
support the amendment. I'll go down, but I'm going to support the amendment. No.
We could
Can I
check.
borrow?
You're right. You can't. I've asked for a clarification. That's the timeframes. So it's up to you whether you go with that or whether you, as the staff has advised.
Okay. Look, I'll have my right to reply. Look, I think this is semantics completely. As you said yourself, Mr. Mayor, we're not doing anything until the trees die anyway. I mean, I don't think it's that imperative that we have this. I think we've got to get it right. Councillor Whipper is right. This village is going up for a state heritage to be listed as the whole village state as a heritage. So I think just to not consider the planting, and just because it's one voice, I think we listen to that voice. This person obviously has taken some interest in what has been proposed and very much in support of this, but is just suggesting that we get the tree plantings right. I can't understand why there'd be this great problem with it. We know it's not going to hold it up. Let's get on with doing the project. I'm not, we've got a time frame to do it, otherwise we'll lose the money. I want to see the Rotary Club see this happening, getting on with it. I don't see why I've got to put a time frame. I don't want to put staff to. I mean, in 2007 or something, we did a master plan that needs to be reviewed on the whole town. Well, we know it's happening. It's going to happen. It will come back at due time, and it will look at the whole lot of Berrima. And if there is the opportunity to make adjustments to our tree policy with regard to the heritage aspects, I don't see that there's a problem. I mean, what's the matter with just saying, let's just consider it? I mean, if it's going to be listed as a heritage item as a whole in Berrima, I mean, that is part of the fabric of the town, and the people have the opportunity to have said, let's just get it right with the plantings. So I'll leave it with you, councillors, but I don't see why the master plan may be flawed, and why not take a bit of time to get it right?
Thank you. So, all in favour of the amendment as moved by Councillor Nelson and second Councillor Andrews, raise their hand. Councillors Nelson, Andrews, Halstead, Markwart and Gare. Those against? Councillors Scandrett, Whipper and McLaughlin. I declare the amendment now the motion. I now put the motion. All in favour of the motion, please raise your hand. Councillors Nelson, Andrews, Halstead, Markwart, McLaughlin and Gare. I declare it carried, and congratulations to all those who have worked out there, and may the shovel go in tomorrow.
Mr Mayor, I'd like my name recorded, please.
Councillor
I don't think it ends here.
Councillor Whipper has asked that his name be recorded. We now move to 10.1, Investment Report, June 2019. Move Councillor Nelson, seconded Councillor Markwart. Councillor McLaughlin.
Oh, big part.
Any discussion to the investment report? Then I put that...
sorry, Mr Mayor.
Well, sorry, Councillor Markwart.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to note that we have had 64.22% invested in A2 institutions, which takes us a little outside the policy guidelines, but I'm personally happy with that because it increases our percentage investment in fossil fuel, anti-fossil fuel financial institutions. So I'm happy to leave it that way, but I'm sure it'll have to be changed. So I'll just make that one comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Markwart. Councillor Nelson.
I don't want to give our acting Deputy General Manager a headache, but when we're talking about fossil fuels and we've got, we're going that way with our investments, but, the cigarette companies we're investing possibly in some of those companies as well. So eventually down the track, we should be getting out of any company that's involved with cigarettes as well. So not moving anything, just
Making a political statement. Thank you. So we have the financial report as presented. All in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, carried. We move on to 10.2, page 16, tender for Mittagong Oval lighting renewal. Move number one. Moving one, seconded Councillor Scandrett, that that in relation to the report, the recommendation in closed committee be adopted. So I'll now ask the GM to read out the option that we have just adopted.
And the recommendation in close the Council has now just adopted is that Council accepts the tender received from Power by Watts Pty Limited for the provision of the Mittagong Oval lighting renewal for the lump sum of $227,295, excluding GST, in accordance with the Local Government General Regulation 2005, Clause 178, Subclause 1, Subclause B.
Thank you, Madam General Manager. We move on to 10.3, page 21, proposed land acquisition barrel. Move seconded Councillor McLaughlin that it be considered enclosed. Seconded Councillor Markwart. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, I recognise the requirement for confidential when matters of this type are being discussed, but I just wanted to recognised that I continue to be opposed to this matter, and if it wasn't involving finance, then it shouldn't go into closed.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Madam General Manager, do you wish to say anything?
You haven't had the vote yet, but I'm just asking if Councillor Scandrett wants to register his vote against it.
Okay, any further discussion? Then I put it all in favour. please raise your hand. Those against, Councillor Scandrett. We move on to page 11 to 11.1. Modifications to seek conditions of consent of approved three-lot subdivision at 10 Franklin Street, Mittagong. Do I have a mover? This is Councillor Nelson, secondly Councillor Scandrett. Any discussion? Then I put it. All in favour? Those against? Carried.
It needs, it's planning matter.
It's a planning matter, so everybody has to vote, show their hands.
It's unanimous.
Unanimous. Thank you. We now move over to page 53, 11.2. Modification to approved 106 unit self-care retirement complex 133 Old Barrel Road, Barrel. And I'm going to ask Mr. Wilton to introduce this because this is against our policy. Through you, Madam General Manager.
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to consider Section 4.55 application 030786.08, which seeks development consent to modify an approved 106-unit self-care retirement complex at 133 Old Barrel Road, Barrel. Councillors be aware that the application seeks to modify Condition 56 to delete the requirement for a 4,500 litre stormwater tank for each unit, as required by Water New South Wales requirements, namely condition number 33, which requires a 522,000 litre end-of-pipe underground rainwater tank for all dwellings in the western catchment of the site, and the assessing officers therefore considered this to be unnecessary. In terms of the on-site detention, the volume will be the same. However, if individual tanks were retained on each of the units, this would provide an opportunity for reuse within the dwellings and also garden and patio areas, whereas the end-of-line arrangement will prevent this opportunity from occurring. The application was neighbour notified to approximately 50 properties, and no submissions were received during the submission period, and accordingly the assessing officers recommended approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Questions to Mr. Wilton?
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. My understanding with these, the basics and tanks that are on properties, isn't that water used in connection with flushing toilets? And the other question I had, does this set a precedent across the Shire with that might lead to other developments being able to dismiss having water tanks?
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Mr. Wilton?
Through the Chair, this development in particular doesn't require a basic certificate to be applied for each dwelling. Any dwellings throughout the Shire obviously do require a basic certificate, and therefore there's no precedent that will be created as a result.
Councillor Marquardt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Question for Mr Wilton through the Chair. Are there any benefits to the community in retaining those holding tanks for individual properties? Thank you.
Mr. Wilton.
Through the Chair, with the 4,500 litre tanks for each individual property, essentially that will enable reuse within the actual structure itself for toilets and also for washing machines and the like, and that would also enable patios, landscaping around those dwellings to be used. So essentially at the end of the day, if they are removed, they could likely create a reduction in on-site detention for each unit.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Halstead.
I find this extraordinary, but not surprising, knowing the track record of the particular developer. If I'm going to do this and then doesn't. This is unbelievable. We have an application
Question,
here.
Councillor Halstead.
Question.
Question.
Question. How can I do that?
I reckon you could
No,
line
it's
up
all
a
right.
thousand.
No, I'll fire the big...
Well, you, right up. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, through you. Mr Wilton, are the existing units and the proposed units dual piped, ready for use of these rainwater tanks for toilets and the like? And secondly, how would the owners of those units and the corporation managing them pump up water to the gardens and the toilets if these tanks did not exist?
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Mr. Wilton.
Through the Chair, essentially the units would be connected to a single tank at the end of the line, which is about 500,000 litres. Essentially, those units wouldn't be able to use that static water source. Essentially, there would be no connection to internal stormwater reuse for the purposes of not only washing machines but also for toilet use as well.
And are the units dual plumbed? You're not sure? That was my question.
Through the chair, dual plumbed in what regard?
Dual plumbing into the toilets. In other words, they can use town water or tank water or recirculate.
Yeah, so again, if the units were disconnected from the 4,500 litre tanks that were proposed, essentially it would be mains water only.
Thank you. Councillor Nelson.
Is the stormwater tank storage, the 4,500 litres, is that the smallest tank capacity, or how did they come up with the 4,500 litre tanks?
Through the chair, that would have been for the purposes of the original application, and 4,500 litres would have been considered appropriate for not only use within the household, but also for on-site detention as well.
Thank you. Councillor Halstead, I take it you're moving
Yeah,
this
it's going to be very quick.
recommendation? Move Councillor Halstead, seconded Councillor Scandrett. Councillor Halstead, away you go.
Well, I was going to ask the question I didn't ask before,
Well,
but it
he's
doesn't
moving
matter.
it to be
I'm happy to move this.
refused.
No, I'm not going to move the approval. So,
No, you're moving it to be you can move that. You can move that it not be approved.
Well, I'm going to move this not.
No, there's not if he's moving that as a recommendation, there is no contradiction. So you can move that they not be approved.
Be refused for the
Yep.
following reason.
Yeah.
We don't have some problem later on. I don't disagree with you, but there seems to be consternation over here. I'm not sure about here, but maybe the team's in got a problem.
The only thing is you're going to have to list as why they
I
why
understand
we're
that.
approving it, not approving it.
The reason that I'm suggesting it be disapproved is for the reason that the development generally is out of kilt, if you like, with what we see in Colavale. And in terms of how we might list those, I'd suggest to you that there's a number of issues that relate to all sorts of things with respect to site density, if you like. But I'll just talk about this, that first of all, the impacts of the development are contrary to what one would expect in a residential area of that type. In other words, that would relate to things like density of development, site. Yep. It's all right. Yeah, no, it's all right, I'll rethink. A little bit off the mark there, sorry about that. Yeah, look, I agree that this should be disapproved, and the reason is that it's inconsistent with the existing policy that applies right across the shire in terms of, It's inconsistent with the existing policy of this council, which requires the construction of these tanks on all residential development within the shire. And I don't think there's any need to say much more than that. I mean, there might be others that want to support things or add to it. To me, I'm just very concerned, if I could just sort of speak to it generally, very concerned about the fact that we're sort of picking one out, and everybody else that puts in even a single dwelling or a builder has to comply with this requirement, and I don't see why everybody else shouldn't.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin.
Yep. Look, I agree with Councillor Halstead on this matter. I think it sets a precedent that we don't want to set. Here we are talking about in a drought environment where we can't use water that we can catch off the roof that'll disappear down into a big tank somewhere, and the people that buy those units haven't got use of that water. I think that's a backward step, Mr Mayor. As we heard from Mr Wilton, they won't have the opportunity to use this water to wash or flush their toilets. You know, so this is a big disadvantage to the people that buy into these units. And I think it sets a dangerous precedent that once this is in, it's on for all and sundry down the track from here to say, oh, well, we've set a precedent now. You know, we're building these seniors living. They don't need to have water tanks. I mean, what sort of message are we sending? Now, if they had put in a tank, a big tank, and then replumbed it and put in a grey water system, that might have been different. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about taking away tanks that are on individual units for the use of the residents of those units. So I think that this is not the way we want to go, especially as we're going through one of the worst droughts in the country's history. I mean, not to be able to, and the extra cost for people to have to use town water for flushing their toilets and all those things. As we heard from Mr Wilton, they don't have to comply with basics, but everyone else that builds a single cottage has to. They somehow, through the legislation, I don't understand, they don't have to do it. Well, I think we've got it there. It's there. I don't think we should take it away. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Nelson.
Just clarification, are we allowed to use our laptops during the council meeting?
You can, as long as you're not sending emails to Facebook pages or whatever.
That's pretty petty.
I'm just seeking clarification. I didn't know that.
Well, you could ask.
We need.
Well, council. No, there's no point of order, but I do ask that because of the inflammatory nature of people using mobiles and laptops and sending messages and disrespecting the system, that you do not use your laptops or your emails. Councillor Markwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I guess water is precious and we should be using water as efficiently as possible. Clearly, all new residents should have water tanks. We should be reusing that water. I'll be supporting the motion by Ken Halstead, and I've given a few reasons why that should be refused to the desk here, and they'll be listed there. Unfortunately, I didn't keep a copy of my reasons, but basically, it's about getting value from that water. If we waive that, others will follow. We need to use that water, and it's crazy to take that away. So the residents of those houses will gain benefit from that. The community will gain benefit. We need to leave those tanks there. I think that's quite clear. And lo and behold, if you'd like to read that, it'll save me speaking, but basically, overall, taking away these tanks is not in the public interest. It's not in the community interest. We need more tanks, not less. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Markwell and McLaughlin. Now, before you, who moved it, Councillor Halstead, there's another reason that I'm going to disagree, is that there is I think 108 units can be built on there, 106. So this decision by the applicant is taking away, if we pass this tonight, would take away the right of those who are moving in to have a tank unless they paid for it, because this will be part of the package. And what's this all about? It's about saving money. You work it out, 100 tanks or whatever, all 4,500 litres plus the plumbing, there's money to be saved. And the setting of the precedent and what's the message being sent to, we've got a water-wise, we're not on water restrictions, thank goodness, and hopefully won't be, but we have a water-wise program for residents, and this would say to the residents, well, doesn't matter, you don't have to worry about it, we won't make you put a tank on. This was legislated, as far as I can remember, after the 2000 to 2007 drought. It was mandated that all new residences throughout the state, as part of the building code, unless I'm mistaken, be fitted with a rainwater tank of some description. So I support you, Councillor Halstead, and this sends a message to the developer that, you know, we are water conscious as much as anybody else, and that amount of water, if we have 10 inches of rain, whatever, and that's another 100, and it's going to be 110 units, tanks, that's a lot of water then going down the creek at one given time. Councillor
I just
Halstead.
wanted to say that I agree with those additions that have been put on by Councillor Marquardt. Did you want to add a seventh one that you were talking about, formulate that?
No, I
You're
think
happy
what
with
you've
what's
got
there
up
covers
there
it?
is...
I just wanted to indicate that I agree with that as is now.
Good. Okay, so we have the right of reply taken. Any discussion further? No, we can't anyway. All in favour of the recommendation? Carried unanimously. We now move on to page 91. 11.3, requests for a final assistance for Winterfest Bundanoon.
Move that way, Mr Mayor.
What are you going to move?
I'm going to move the $854.
So you're moving option 1?
Option 1. Yep.
And it will come from, seconded Councillor Scander, from contingency fund.
Sorry, you got a motion.
Oh, okay, well, something's gone up. Okay, well, Councillor Nelson's really Councillor Nelson's motion, but he's all right. Move Councillor McLaughlin. You happy with that?
Yes, sir.
And seconded Councillor Scandrick. Happy with that?
Mr Mayor, I did take the time to ask...
Councillor Scandrick, you may have the right to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did take the time to just ask about Bundanoon, the Winterfest just held, and last year it lost somewhere between $4,000 and $5,000. This year they're hopeful that it may be less of a loss, but it was run by the Bundanoon Community Association.
Thank you. It is a good draw card, and the only comment I make is that we are getting more and more requests for financial support from community organisations, and that is going to be reflected by the year's end in the budget contingency for the contingency vote, I think. Anyway, that's the recommendation. Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. We move over to 11.4, page 94, future planning proposals for residential development. Do you need an introduction, or you have move Councillor Whipper, seconded Councillor Andrews? Any discussion, or do you want an introduction?
Just an introduction
question. Yes, introduction, please, Mr. Pepping. Thank you. Through you, General Manager.
Through the Chair, the purpose of this report is to follow up on a resolution of Council at the last meeting to bring forward a report to support Council staff in not accepting any planning proposals for residential development in the foreseeable future, to enable the Council staff to finalise the development of the residential housing strategy. So this report is before you and recommends that the recommendation be supported.
Thank you. Councillor Scandrick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just an indication of the expected timeline, please.
Mr. Pepping.
Through the Chair, as explained at the previous meeting, the staff have more or less assured Council that every effort will be done to complete the residential housing strategy by the end of this year, 2019. However, it is noted that Council, in its resolution last meeting, did not specify a time frame, but that's what we're working towards.
Okay, so the indication is Councillor Halstead.
Yeah, look, I support what's being said here too, but the thing I'm concerned about is we may well be challenged because the law is such that if someone puts one in, somehow we've got to do something with it. But I think this sends a pretty good message, and you can't have both. The housing strategy is very important in my view. Once things stack up behind that, then there'll be a lot of things that will be enforced in a right and proper way. So the logic is obvious, is commendable, but just remember we may well be challenged.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead, and take the point. But as you said, it sends out a message. The council staff, if we want to get this completed, then they've got to have clear wind. Otherwise, they're just going to keep up backing backing up behind and keep holding it up. So, yep, I thought it was a good idea, so
Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy that it's been put. Councillor
Mr.
Nelson.
Mayor, in my enthusiasm to help the staff, I've put there that the press release be prepared advertising of 1 above. Possibly that should be 1 and 2 above.
Yes, it's...
So sorry, if you could make that correction. 1 and 2 above for both 3 and 4.
All right, you're happy with that, Councillor Nelson, with the wording now? Hang on, we'll wait until it goes up. Okay, put that, all in favour? Against? Carried. Then we move to 11.5, dividing fences resolution, page 101. Councillors? Councillor Scandrett, you moving it?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to ask a question, if I may.
Yes, you can ask a question.
Thank you.
Possible, Mr. Mayor, just to get a brief introduction.
Yes.
Okay, then we'll just resume, Councillor Scandrett.
Yes.
This was brought forward, just so the public are aware, from Councillor Whipper in trying to control the plantings of large trees, namely Leylandii, on council verges, which then block rural vistas of views throughout the Shire, which we hold quite dearly, and we are at wit's end, but we can ask for an update in relation to this. Councillor, Mr Wilton, or over this side, Mr Lacey, who are you General Manager?
Sorry, I just turned off. The purpose of this report is to advise that a resolution of the council can't be legally implemented. The resolution required council officers to try and address this issue under a piece of legislation called the Dividing Fences Act, which enables people that have a dividing fence to issue a fencing notice, and then if it's not agreed, take it to the court or the tribunal. And it does include, a fence for that purpose of the Act does include a hedge. The difficulty and the legal restraint that stops council being able to use it, unfortunately, is the Act itself says that it doesn't impose any obligations or rights on a local council or a roads authority. It's for that reason that we've taken advice. We've taken advice off a prominent barrister. And then even tried to get one of our panel firms to actually see if there was a possibility that it could be argued. The conclusion is that it can't be argued, and that it's doubtless that the Dividing Fences Act says that it doesn't apply to a local council or roads authority, and that therefore the resolution of the 11th of April 2018 can't be lawfully implemented. The recommendation is that Council notes this and notes that no further action will be taken in relation to that resolution.
Thank you, Mr Lacey. Questions to staff? Councillor Scandrett, question?
Mr Mayor. Mr Lacey, did you explore, I know what the resolution said, but did you explore the Roads Act at all in this? Because one of the issues that was raised before was road safety, particularly icing of the road.
That actually was a potential option that was explored. There is a provision under the Roads Act where a local council, or being a roads authority, can remove an encroachment or an obstruction, but they are the words, an encroachment or an obstruction.
On private land or council?
On a road.
On a road. Right.
The difficulty would be arguing that a dividing fence or a hedge is an obstruction, is either an obstruction or an encroachment on the road itself. It may be dangerous, but the words in the Roads Act are that we can direct someone to remove an encroachment or an obstruction to a road.
Right, thank you. And for what would road safety be an issue there in terms of black ice?
Potentially road safety would
Yes.
be an issue, yeah.
A potential one. Thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, hearing from Mr Lacey, the question is, I guess, where do we need to go with this now? Because I don't think we're finished with this, Mr Mayor. I'm just saying, do we have to go back? The question is, do we have to go back to the state government and look for change of legislation? Don't answer that question.
I think that's through to the keeper, but through you to Mr Lacey.
I don't think that's leading the witness, is it? I'm just asking the question.
Councillor, I don't think our General Counsel can advise you whether or not to go to the state member. That really is...
Not the state member, the state government.
Oh, the state government. Well, through the state member.
Well, I think it's safety, as Councillor Scandridge said. If
That's a...
Can we do it, or can we, the answer
That's a
is,
councillor's
I suppose
decision.
we can lobby, we could lobby the
That's
state
right.
member to change the legislation
Well, that might be
to
a start.
stop Leylandii being planted on, and you know where that'll go. Any questions further? Councillor
I'm
House,
just going to
question?
move the motion that's in here because it's jurisdictional, has already been said quite obviously, and that's where it sits. You want to lobby as another issue later on, that might be something you do, but you won't get anywhere, so don't waste any more of the community money.
Thank you. So you're moving it. Have you got a question, Councillor Whipper?
I'll move an amendment to that motion.
Okay, so wait a minute, when we have a second, Councillor Markwart. Councillor Whipper?
So the amendment would be the recommendation.
No, Councillor Halstead is moving the motion. Councillor Whipper is now going to move an amendment.
That's right. That's what
Yes.
I thought I was doing. You've confused me. My amendment would be the recommendation as written with an addendum which would be that council write to the Premier of New South Wales seeking a meeting in relation to this matter.
So we have a B that Councillor McLaughlin, that a letter of request in relation
urgency.
to
I think
council's...
we've been talking about this for 15 years. I think it's beyond urgent. I think it's critical now that we meet with somebody at that level who can make a decision. If I do have a seconder, I can speak to
Yeah, he's got
them.
a seconder.
Thank you. This has been going
Councillor
on for
McLaughlin.
far too long, and if this is unlawful, in my eyes, it just points out the fact that the law is often an ass. And in this instance, there's no doubt about it, because we know that by stealth, our views are being stolen by people who I would say that are probably unethical in a lot of ways. And yes, I'll say unethical because they're stealing the views from this community. We know that tourism is a major attraction in this shire. We know that people don't come out here to see little rat runs of Leylandii and mazes of trees blocking views and vistas. These are heritage views that we're talking about. These are rural vistas that people get out of the city to come and experience. I think that it's about time. We've been to the ministers before, Minister for Planning, Minister for Tourism. At one stage we even had one Minister of Tourism, Matt Brown, supporting us, saying, yeah, I believe in this. Took it back to Cabinet, and what did they do? We can't do anything. Well, you know, that's really not good enough, because out of desperation we've had to try and be innovative and bring up the Dividing Fences Act. We're told that it's unlawful, but it's not ended yet because the problem grows. Just today, driving in here, I saw a new row, probably a kilometre long, and a beautiful view that won't be there in 5-10 years' time. It'll be stolen. People won't even know that it exists unless it's those people who live behind it. So this is a real issue, and I think that we need to stamp home to the Premier and the Cabinet and whoever else that hasn't been listening that this is a real threat, a real plague to our community. And I think we need to do that in a consolidated way. We need to go in there and throw it on the table so that they do listen, because it's outrageous. Like we've said before, if somebody brings a development application and says, I want to put a 40-foot high green fence along the road or between a property, would we approve that? No. but in effect that's what they're doing. Nobody maintains these hedges. If they're maintained, nobody's got a problem. But they're let run riot, run wild. They don't provide anything to the environment. They sterilise the land around it, don't provide any habitat at all. All they do is create a barrier between communities. So councillors, I think, you know, we have to note this, but it doesn't end, like Councillor McLaughlin said, it doesn't end here. I think we need to get a little bit more assertive because it's a real issue that's going to come back to plague not only us, but future generations as well.
Thank you. You could say the trees will die of old age before anything's done, I think. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, it's interesting, I'm standing here in the sunlight, and that's what we're talking about here, is the lack of light and view on our roads. Now, in this document here, which was the presentation, the former Mayor, Councillor Halstead and myself, Mr Pepping, and you were unable to attend, Councillor Whipper, but we went up to see the Honourable Anthony Roberts on the 12th of September 2017 to talk about this exact subject. And that was it there, Rural Vistas, and there was a very good presentation. And some of the things we talked about there were not only the matters that Councillor Whipper's raised about tourism and so on, and Rural Vistas, but we talked about road safety. We talked about, for example, motorcycles on some of our rural roads. Range roads are a perfectly good example, and there's some in the southern end of the Shire too, which have overshadowing, and in the winter months you end up with black ice. So, in fact, the member for Wallandilly, I think, was at the meeting when we were there, if my memory serves me, the Honourable Nathaniel Smith, as he now is. So, and he's interested in motorcycles, as we know. So we could talk to him about that. On inspections recently, Mr Mayor, we were in Atkin Road in Barrel, and it was quite interesting. There's a row of, I think, pines there. They'd been undercut, and you could see through to the houses, the significant heritage houses, landscape there, under. So that maintenance, as Councillor Whipper, I think, was pointing out, is a solution to this, but a better solution is just to not allow these tall hedges, particularly where they impact on rural amenity. The road safety issue, I think, is one that might be worth quoting, and I would like to suggest here to Councillor Whipper that you add 3 that the Honourable Nathaniel Smith and the Honourable Wendy Tuckerman be also copied in on that correspondence, if that's all right. Okay, thank you.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Yeah, I think we're all singing from the same songbook here, Mr Mayor. Look, they do have a legitimate use, hedging in farm properties to stop wind and give protection to cattle, but that's not what we're seeing here. It's like a little fiefdom. It's like the old days. I've got this bit of property and I'm going to surround it with a moat, a wall, if you like, not a moat, a wall, a hedge wall, 40 foot high, and damn everyone else. Just do what I like. It's my land, I'll do what I like. Everyone's got the right to do it, as we understand. So there goes the Shire. So people come in, they move, and they plant all these and they move away. We know that we had councillors here before that went out and identified some of the vistas that we had. We spent a lot of time driving around the Shire. About 3 councillors taking them back. I asked Mr Pepping, he provided, and I think probably some of those photos that Councillor Scandrett had came from that file. So we've got photograph evidence showing these are the views that we like to protect. We go back later and they're gone. They're disappeared, and we think that's a shame. And I've spoken to people and they've had a complete different attitude that I think most of us have. That's their land, they can do what they like. Well, I take the view that this is for all of us. This is our Shire to enjoy. You buy a land, people, you don't own a view. But have you got the right, as Councillor Scandrett said, if you were to put up a 40-foot wall on your boundary, you came in with a DA, you wouldn't be allowed to do it. Or if you started to do it, we'd have it pulled down. We know the story of someone put a massive, great mound on a certain property to stop people looking in. Council went after him, won the case. Guess what? He put in a row of Leylandis. He said to you, that's what he said to council, and he was legally allowed to do that. And there goes the view. Range Road in particular, where you had this magnificent view of the Shire looking down across our water catchment land to Sydney. I think it's all just about gone. And the more you drive around our Shire, you see more of it disappearing, as Councillor Whipper's saying. And it's just such a shame. I don't know why people think that just because they own their 100-acre block, I mean, you can put in a windbreak without destroying the amenity of the area. But they're not windbreaks. They just want their own little, this is my land and no one's going to look in and I'm going to close it off to everyone. And I think that's a very selfish attitude from those landowners. I don't know what we do. Do we shame them? How do we shame them? I don't know.
You could drive along the road. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I'll support the amendment that's put up by Councillor Whipper and McLaughlin. And Mr Mayor, I think you'd probably remember that we actually took this motion to the Local Government Association conference as a motion, and I don't think we did any good because the city slickers didn't understand what we were talking about, and even the people at Cobar didn't understand either. They just see straight out. But yeah, we didn't get anywhere, and you did go and see somebody, so whether we have any success or not, I'm not sure, but I'll say good luck to whoever does the representation on this one. Perhaps you can get through to the Premier and she can lay down the law. But anyway, good luck with it, and I'll support it.
Well, I'm going to support the motion. I take the point that's all been raised, but as everybody's pointed out, we've gone to ministers, we've gone to the Local Government Association, we've gone to the Local Government Conference, we've gone to members of Parliament. They can't understand the purpose because we are one of the very few councils that have a beautiful views where we drive. Others don't, so they're not going to change the law for us. So as much as I've supported this, I couldn't even get council support to ban them from being planted in council residential areas. And the other thing you've got to remember, as much as I support to get right to the Premier and whatever, and I can do that without a council resolution, is that if they make the hedge 3.5 metres high, it meets our dividing fence suggestion anyway, and you can't see over the top of a 3.5 metre high hedge if they were to do it. So I can't see us winning it. The only way is that we go out with a chainsaw and cut all the Leylandii down that may be on our road reserve. We can do that. No, that's not a motion. Then it costs us an absolute fortune to remove them. So I'm going to support the recommendation and let somebody else come back with another resolution that might be able to be worked. But I cannot see the Premier of New South Wales changing legislation for the removal of 1,000 Leylandii. I just can't see it. So I'll support the recommendation. All in favour of the amendment, please raise your hand. Councillors Markwart, McLaughlin, Whipper, Scandrett and Nelson. Those against. Councillors Halstead, Andrews and Gare. We go down. I declare the cut off at ground level. I declare the motion. You moved the amendment. Then the amendment becomes the motion. I put that all in favour. Okay, you got it. You got it, Councillor Whipper. Oh, dear Madam Premier, please change the legislation. Okay, 12.1, page 105. Legal report. Councillor Nelson.
Have you moved that way?
Move Councillor Nelson. Seconded Councillor Markwart. Any discussion? Councillor Nelson.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I asked the council staff which one of these items we refused, and was pointed out to me that the top of the list, Mossvale Projects, Woolworths, was refused. That cost us $270,000. Willow Properties was refused, $135,000. Tulio, 101. Turlin Properties was refused, 200,000. The point being that every time we refuse an application, it costs money when we go to the Land Environment Court. So I'm conscious that when we refuse applications, that it costs money in the Land Environment Court. And while I'm here, I'm representing all the constituents across the Shire, not just one particular constituents of one town. And so further on tonight, when I debate and vote, I'll be thinking of the whole Shire, all the constituents that hear, not just one particular group of people.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, in closed I'll be asking about the sixth one there, Blackwood nominees, and just the outcome in terms of cost recovery there. But I have to say here, in what Councillor Nelson raised, look, I don't resile from going to court on matters that I believe are important to this Shire and the residents of this Shire and town and village people of this Shire. It's a necessary part, sadly, of our budget, and whilst it does consume a lot of money, I know a couple of councillors keep on saying, well, we've got to, not invoke any more costs. Well, you're jumping at shadows, because sometimes we win. And I point out Kmart, Mr Mayor, I point out Woolworths and others where we have had successful victories, and the best one, I guess, is Kmart, because right now there's a residential development going up there to show that we were able to turn the tide there and end up with a suitable development to the southern entrance of Bowral. So sometimes it's quite a good investment, and in the case of Kmart, which is I think of the scale there that Woolworths was, it was a good outcome, and the community were very keen on that, very solid. And when they demonstrate that, Mr Mayor, when they demonstrate...
we're asking questions in relation to the...
I'm just making a statement like Councillor Nelson
yes,
did.
Well, you've...
Okay.
Yes, well,
thank you. Well, when they demonstrate that, I think we should respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Councillor McLaughlin.
Oh, mine isn't a question, just a comment, Mr Mayor, and I take on board what Councillor Nelson has to say, and he's right. I think we do raise concerns about the amount of money, but then again, a lot of these are brought to us over the 40 days, and we're just taken to court. We have no response. But of course, as a council, we've got to be responsible to our planning policies. And what we see is where the Shire is going. We have stood up for communities before. Mr Mayor, you'll remember how much money, when I was first on council with Bundanoon, and I won't say the names, but certain developers that wanted to do water carting out of that, and we lost that one. But we stood up for the community. It never went ahead. It cost us, I think, $500,000 to fight that. And it would have really been very detrimental to the people of Bundanoon to have water tankers rumbling up and down that hill or through that main street. Now, I think sometimes we really have to look at what's at stake. And, we went out there and we lost it on a technicality, but it still hasn't happened, so that was a good thing. But, yeah, look, I'm mindful of what Councillor Nelson says, but I still think too, with regard to some of the issues, we really have to stand up for our principles, and where there's a fight on that we need to
Councillor
take up.
McLaughlin.
Thank you.
Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I stand also just to support previous councillors' comments. Sometimes we have to go to court. At this stage, unlike our northern neighbours, local government still have some control over how this Shire develops. There's no IHAPs, there's not a panel that's probably top heavy with developers, and the lack of community representation. Councillors around this table vote for the community's interests. We're going through a process at the moment, local character statements. I hope our local character statement is not Leylandii, for God's sake, and our local housing strategy. Then, if we can put that in place and we feel assured, maybe we won't have to go to court so much, because that message will be out there, what we expect as residents of the Southern Highlands, the Wingecarribee. But I don't know why people are afraid to go and represent our planning principles, our values, and our residents. So sometimes we have to spend money and sometimes we lose. But nevertheless, we're elected to represent the whole community, as Councillor Nelson said, and our whole community consists of those individuals who live within the Shire. When they come forward, particularly from villages, and they have issues, I think it's up to us to listen and respond accordingly. If that costs us money to represent them in court, sometimes it has to be, unfortunately.
Thank you. Councillor Halstead.
Look, it does worry me to see that amount of money, but I agree with a number of the other councillors here that there are occasions when you're dealing with planning issues that you have to defend them. And quite frankly, this Shire is under attack and has been, I think, for at least a decade. I look at these figures and I think former Pittwater Council used to spend 3 times that every year, and it was criticised. The problem is that if you look at the statistics of the Land and Environment Court, 3/4, 75% of all cases are lost by councils. So that's not good. But sometimes you have to take on an issue. We've got to be careful that we take on the issues that we are likely to get the right outcome from. But on the other hand, as expressed by Councillor McLaughlin, there's many occasions here where they go past the 40 days. So this is a fault of the legislation, and there's an automatic right of appeal to the court. So a number of them get there without any, if you like, original discussion or consideration and investigation by staff, planning staff, for example, engineering staff as well. So it's a real worrying figure when you see that sort of, whatever it was, $1.8 million just in the month of June. But that doesn't cover just the month of June. That's obviously what we're paid in the month of June. I don't know over what period they're outstanding, because if that was relative to every month, I would imagine it's over a long period of time. You just happen to pay a lot of them in June. Thank God for that, because otherwise you'd be looking at a ridiculous figure. So I assume that, but I'm not too sure it's all that clear in there. You might have something in the body of the report that says that, I'm not sure. So it's extraordinary, but things have to be defended. And most of the ones I look down there, I'm thinking, yeah, I can understand why we've defended those, because that means there's community problems, there's community input. And there's a group up here tonight, which I'm not allowed to look at, but clearly they have an input and they're very concerned about an issue at Colavale. Well, we have them all over the Shire, and this is easy pickings. I mean, this is that perfect distance from Sydney where people can travel back and forth, so it's under great demand for all sorts of development, not just residential, but, my God, the diseases, and they are all those sorts of things like, massive density type things, and I could cite a few on the way back from Barrow to here, but I better not mention them. That incredible densities, and they create problems. Or the one maybe we're dealing with earlier tonight, where you have massive development foisted on you, and you've got to take an action, because otherwise it's open slather. Because as soon as you let one of those through, which has a problem, or is contrary to sort of the existing development principles, if you like, and densities, you're gone, because that is then something that will be looked at as a precedent, certainly when the court looks at further cases like it. So we've got to defend this community while we can.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Mark Watt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor Halstead's right. This money represents our line in the sand. Our line in the sand against, I'll say, overdevelopment or inappropriate development. But there is a balance. You can't stop everything. Some things get through, some things don't. But this is a representation of our line in the sand. Now, as councillors, we may actually have different opinions on various developments, here, there, or wherever. But overall, this captures it. And I think it's money well spent. We must be aware that the money is being spent and be careful. But to me, it's very important we draw this line in the sand. If we draw a wriggly line, people will get through it. We need to have a good solid line, and this money I think is well spent and represents our position. So I don't have a big problem with the money being spent here. It hurts, that's a lot of money, but I think it's important to keep the Southern Highlands the Southern Highlands. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not going to lead Councillor Mark Nelson in his right of reply, but I think perhaps he probably a little bit misinterpreted what he was saying, and that is, I think maybe he can correct me, and I'll wait, I suppose, until he does so. But my feeling is where there is a recommendation comes to council for approval and it's knocked back, then we can be off to court, as opposed to the other way, where we obviously knock something back and we go to court. And not all of them here are council decisions, as has been pointed out by Councillor McLaughlin and Halstead. 40 days expires and away they go to court. Some of them, I think, do it on purpose, if I may be so cynical. And then some are made by outside authorities like the JRPP and not council involvement at all, and then go to court. So I think Councillor Nelson was making a point, but I'll now ask him to see whether I'm right or whether he wants to clarify something.
No, you were right, Mr Mayor, and I'll sum up. And I did it for a reason. I raised the issue tonight, and I was looking for a response, and I thank Councillor Whipper and Halstead, because we only get 3 minutes now to debate, and so we're getting a little bit more of the debate early on a certain item that's coming up, and it's going to be one of the hardest decisions that I make, Mr Mayor. I've looked at the facts, and it'll be a hard decision. So I thank the councillors for their input, and I do acknowledge that that principle we stood on did cost us $500,000, and we lost. So that's you've got to pick your fights, haven't you, Councillor McLaughlin? So thanks.
Okay, on the last word, I put the recommendation. All in favour, please say aye. No, those against, carried. We move to 12.2, exclusion of notice of motion from business paper of 10th of July 2019. Move Councillor Halstead, second Councillor Markward. Put it, all in favour, against, carried. We move over to 15.1, minutes of the Heritage Advisory Committee meeting held on the 5th of July 2019. Moved Councillor McLaughlin.
Yep.
Seconded Councillor Whipper. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I appreciate your time and the General Manager's time with selection of a person to come back on the committee. As you are aware, Mr Mayor, we did have a very strong interest in this committee. What we're suggesting in this report, if it's adopted tonight, that we increase the community representation on that committee. It's a very strong committee, I believe. It's very committed. We have some expertise on that committee that can really help, I believe, to give some sort of assistance to our staff, or the expertise that they have are very relevant, and I think that to accept one more person onto this committee due to work commitments and all sorts of things, people give up their time to come on this committee because they're passionate about this shire and about heritage. So just on that note, that's one of the recommendations. The General Manager pointing something out that I haven't.
Well, if you go to page 114, that's the recommendation.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, I'll go to that. I'll move the recommendation.
Hang on, we have...
Yes. Oh, do you want me to speak to that, Mr Mayor?
Well, you're 5.3, you're looking at number 2, that the committee recommends the number of community is not in this recommendation.
I beg your pardon, yes, it's got to come back for a vote from council.
It's got to
You're
come
right,
back.
you're correct. I'm sorry, yeah, you're right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I
So
wonder
the-
what you were mentioning there.
The
That was my mistake.
recommendation, so
Yeah.
you're moving the recommendation?
I'm moving the recommendation, but I will be coming back to councillors to support an extra person on that committee. Councillors, we did
Well,
get seven.
okay, well,
yeah,
we've done the interview, we've done the
yes,
culling process. That will come back to next meeting, I would think,
that's correct.
as part of the appointments of the committee.
And if I could just mention in passing, Mr Mayor, look, this council has, what, 15 months to run, at which stage there will be applications for people that might come on that committee, you know, in that time. So I think that we should mention that in the letter that when we send out to those people that weren't selected this time to please keep us in mind because there might be people that want to stand down or what have you.
Yep, there'll be a spill of all positions
Yours,
after
that's
the,
right. Yep. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
September, 12 months. Okay, so a roundabout way, we are adopting the Heritage Advisory Committee minutes, page 114, moved by councillors McLaughlin and seconded councillor Whipper. Any discussion? And I put it, all in favour. Those against, carried. Now we go to page 135. 16.1, question with notice, Berrima Road project. And the recommendation is there. Move councillor McLaughlin, seconded councillor Markwart. Any discussion? Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I'm stunned, Mr Mayor. This question by Councillor Turland has brought out some information which I don't recall knowing, and that is that we haven't as yet acquired the land that for this project, which originally was going to proceed from a, well, I think you did the contract signing on it in 2015. Am I correct?
No, this has been the hold-up, councillor.
Well, I think it says here we're currently having the site surveyed. Why currently? Why didn't we do it 4 years ago?
Okay.
Anyway,
well, wait a minute.
I think it's
You've
very
asked the question.
Well,
Councillor, Mr. Paul isn't
not
here.
here, no.
But my understanding is that it was only up until the speaking with the upper Elshins of Boral did this take place about a final approval about 3 weeks ago. But I'll let the General Manager speak.
Mr Mooney can advise you of the current situation.
So through you, Mr Mayor, obviously the surveying of the land was dependent upon the design. The delays around the design and the complications around the design have been reported to council via the report that went to the Finance Committee, and that was the delay in holding up the final survey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And this is the project we've formally foregone the $4.6 million grant on.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've been a little bit involved in this, as you may be aware, through Mr Paul, of course. This is operational, but I did work at the plant for 30 years, and I did have the opportunity to speak to the Managing Director with regard to council's frustrations, and I don't think the right hand knew what the left hand was doing, if I can say. The planning people within Boral were not following up on what they were telling council they were doing, basically. So the easements that we needed to get sorted out weren't being sorted out. So in the end, I went right to the top. I went to Ross Harper and told Ross Harper.
I don't think names.
Oh, okay. Well, the general manager of Boral Australia, if you like, and basically said, can you intervene on our behalf? My understanding from Mr Paul is now all those impediments have been sorted out, right down to where there are infrastructure under the road to do with power and water. Apparently there is none in the sites where we need to put the bridge, so I think a lot of that has been solved. Also, where the high voltage power lines are going has been organised, and that easement has been I think approved and gazetted so that the power company can move forward. So I think most of the problems have been sorted out, and I still believe we have the opportunity, as I understand it from Mr. Paul, that 4.2 million or whatever it was still might be possible.
No, I think I can quite openly say that money has been returned, or the grant has been. We are not taking advantage of the grant at this stage. I think I can say that. Okay, so that who moved that? Councillors McLaughlin and Markwart put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Questions with notice 1520/2019 Victoria Street, Barrel. Councillor Scandrett has asked the question. You moving that it be received and noted?
I'm going to just make a statement on it, Mr. Mayor.
I'm happy to do this.
Move Councillor Markwart, seconded Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr. Mayor, I note that this particular property actually is Mittagong Road, or 5 of the 6 blocks of Mittagong Road. And I note also that since I've originally lodged this, a legal report has updated the amount to, it's nearly 202,000. But my reason for asking these questions, which are not being answered in the public here today, was to, well, we just had a whole big debate about legal costs in Land and Environment Court, and I wanted to know, in this particular matter and another one, which I mentioned earlier, Blackstone nominees in Mittagong, where apparently a number of amended plans were put forward in discussions. What costs are we recovering? Have those plans been adopted by the court? Has a line in the sand been drawn? And therefore, what costs is council recovering? Because everyone here has just talked about the need to reduce our Land and Environment Court expenditure. Well, here's an opportunity to do it. Go in hard and make sure you get your recovery. So I've said here, how many amendments? No answer in public. How many times did the court permit new plans to be relied on? No answer. How many times did we ask for costs? No answer. I can't speak here what's in closed council. And what were each of those requests and outcomes? This is in the public interest, Mr. Mayor. That's what I put this question in, was to get those answers. Quite frankly, I mean, it'd be better if we had a more transparent way of reporting this to show where there is a possibility for council to recover costs, because I certainly don't want to be walking away from potential battles in any case, in the land environment case, which are based on merit. And if merit is where it is, we've got to hold our ground. On this particular matter, I believe this should have been reported in the public, these answers to this question. So I'll move an amendment to this, and that is that the matters enclosed be reported at a future council meeting in relation to this matter.
Do we have a seconder?
We will see.
Lapses through the want of a seconder.
Make it note. Thank you.
Councillor Halstead.
It's pretty clear that when we discuss these matters tonight in the closed committee, which I'm not a great fan of at any time, but some things have to be dealt with there, and this is the sort of thing that will be. But clearly the outcome of all those questions put there, I think, will be dealt with in that meeting. I'm certainly hoping they are. But I think what maybe the councillor is not aware of, although he should be, because he attended a lot of court cases, a lot of sessions of that court case in the Land Environment Court, that amendments that are made by a developer sometimes, or an applicant, whatever you like, are not always because that's the wish of the applicant. It could be as a result of a request from the council or consultants, or indeed, dare I say, the court. In other words, the commissioner or the judge. Now, I'm not specifically talking about this one, but I mean, that's the process. The sort of questions you've asked there could be asked about almost any large development, large-scale development. You know, a development comes in, or an application comes in, there might be reasons why density is a bit high, or maybe there could be some non-compliance with a DCP, which after all is a guide, and those sorts of things. And so It's not unusual for me. I don't know how many amendments there are. You'd actually know. I think this is a Dorothy Dix. So I think you'd know the answer to all of these. And I don't, because I didn't go to any of them, or nor have I spoken with the developer, who happens to be a councillor, who's just beside you, because I don't get engaged in those sorts of things. But I would imagine that's fairly typical for any development that goes before the court will have these things happen. So am I surprised at your questions? No, they'd be fairly normal, straightforward, and hopefully they'll be addressed one way or the other. So when they are, and there's a position that council takes, obviously that should be made public, just as the ones were earlier tonight in terms of the amount. In fact, you already know the amount for that particular appeal. And so this is normal. I mean, I attended Land Environment Courts probably for a 20-year period, so that wasn't unusual to me then. That's way back in the early days of the court. Things happen, amendments are changed. A consultant will come in on behalf of the council or the developer and they'll say, what about this? Oh, we better put a set of amended plans in. Or all of a sudden there's a decision that, well, someone comes up with the idea, or maybe this land might flood. Maybe it might flood, for example, or whatever else. And those things, therefore, bring down amendments. So I'm not surprised about this, and I'm just a bit annoyed that you try to make an issue out of that on a particular issue, on a particular development, which is a councillor who has declared his interest all the way through this. I'm sure of that. And this is just normal things that happen. So am I defending him? No, I'm not. I'm not here to do that. I defend anybody. I'll defend whoever I think should be defended. Now, there's a ratepayer. Normally, that's who I'm interested in, the ratepayer. And if that means going to court to get that defence, that's what I'll do. We'll be part of.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Yes, and I think the big thing is that it will be the legal report will come back to Council on the 24th of July, which is today, but the matters are to be discussed in close. So I put the recommendation, all in favour, against, carried. We move to you want your name recorded? Councillor Scandrett is requesting his name be recorded. 16.3, page 137. Question with notice. Council cash reserves. Somebody moving the recommendation.
I'll move, Mr. Mayor.
Move, Councillor Scandrett. Yes, Councillor seconded. Councillor Markwart. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, the intent of this question, which I look forward to getting more answers on later in finance and so on, was just to give the public an understanding of what grants were out there and what Section 94 funds and so on had been levied against what projects, and to make that a simpler process for the public to read.
Thank you.
I'll encourage staff to look at that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scandrett. Put the recommendation, all in favour. Those against, carried. 16.4. Question with notice 17/2019 Berrima Deviation Road and Bridge. The information is there. Move, Councillor.
I've already got it on.
Yep.
So
okay.
I'll move that, but I want to ask a question.
Yep.
So
Moved. Seconded. Councillor Nelson. Councillor Halstead.
To me, this is not a comprehensive answer, and hopefully one would come, because otherwise other actions may be taken down the line by who I don't know, but I might be one of them. You can't just say those sorts of things outright like that and say, oh, well, back in 17 we warned you. That's about one aspect of which we dealt with tonight. But there's a whole lot of issues. So at some stage, and from your own admission, Mr. Mayor, you said that back in October of last year was the first time you heard about it, as in a decision needed to be made because, my God, there was a major problem there. It was more than one issue. So, and then, of course, Council gets told on the 20th of February 2019. To me, this is a very complex issue, and quite frankly, I'm not going to let it go. But at the moment, I think noted is probably the way to go, and who knows what might come out down the line. But I think a more constructive, more comprehensive answer should come on this one. And I may pursue it another way, like I said. Through here, I don't know what the mechanism is yet, but I'm not happy with the process and that explanation at this point in time. Maybe something else might come forth.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Scandrett, but I just make the point that I got the the knowledge that things were, because we couldn't get anybody to sign off on our easements, which we've just heard about. And that was just after I became mayor, and you know what it's like, councillors, Halstead and Whipper, you get updates on where certain projects are and what's happening. So, and then we ran into October, November, one meeting in December, and then nothing until January. So, February, I mean. So I can sleep very easily at night because there is nothing been not forthcoming. Councillor Scandrett.
Mr Mayor, the response says, as Councillor Halstead pointed out, that we were initially advised in October 2017. That's not last year we're talking about here. We're talking about a year and a half ago, nearly 2 years ago, right? And this project was going off the rails back then. It had problems and we didn't resolve those. Sure, now we're moving forward. I'm hearing that, but it's not as if we've had comprehensive updates. I certainly, back then in October 17, I don't recall, and on my records I don't believe show, any update to councillors saying, oh, potential unknown delays. I don't recall that, Mr Mayor.
It was in the, Councillor Scandrett, it was in the business paper.
Mr Mayor, there was no opening up of what that information was, what the problems were, and so on. Since then, we've seen two engineers go out the door.
Councillor Scandrett, I am not going to allow you or any councillor to stand and make allegations that are not correct. And I have the 2017 report.
Yes.
And it says there are difficulties with the power line rerouting.
Yes. Yes, the power lines were there. But all this other stuff, Mr Mayor, has only been detailed out in recent times. Yeah, we heard on the Vine this and that, but we've since lost engineers to this from this job. We've lost the grant, has been recognised earlier in the meeting, and we've also got a problem now that reputationally we're not seen to be very competent with our project management, in my view. So that's why I think this is a very interesting question, and I think that in the future, when this matter gets fully revealed, we will see in fact where the problems were.
Councillor Scandrett, I can give you my word, it has been fully revealed. Okay? I cannot do any more, we cannot give any more. Councillor Whipper.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just on this matter, I'm just wondering, because there are a couple of projects I think that that councillors do have an interest in. Is it possible to have an information session on this so that we can raise any relevant questions in that forum for clarification? The other one that I'm flagging is Station Street as well. I think they're two projects.
Station Street is probably going to be discussed tonight, so that might you might have. If councillors are going to, if it's going to help councillors understand, then I have no dramas. I cannot see any new information coming forward.
No, I think it's better forum than to have discussion around the table.
Then yes, there will be an information session specifically for the Berrima Road deviation.
Yep.
And we will represent any information, anything question that you have, so we can put this to bed and let this. There's no skeletons there.
No.
You open the cupboard, there's nothing in there.
Okay.
But
right.
anyway,
your assurances, Mr.
I
Mayor.
will make sure there's an information session. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, we received a full and frank report about this matter, and you know, earlier this year, which detailed exactly what was happening. And you know, when you're saying we heard on the line this and that, Well, we heard a full frank discussion about what was happening. And in your view, I don't agree with your view. We all heard the same explanation. You've got and you're carrying on with it. Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't agree with your view, based on the explanation that was given to us, and there's a full report there. Mr. Mayor, you just give Councillor Whipper the report. And
no, we will have another information session to clarify any issues that may pass over in general debate in council.
Well, thanks,
okay,
Mr.
so
Mayor.
that will happen.
All right.
Sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I'll look forward to that.
Thank you. Councillor McLaughlin?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I still remember the report that was given, and I thought it was pretty frank, really, and explained a lot of the problems. As I've already said earlier tonight, big organisation, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, and that applied to Boral. I understand. I mean, Mr Mayor, you remember when here they were, when I worked for them a few years ago now, that they had a community centre which was on their land. The council leased for $1. The manager of the plant did not know that their branch, their properties branch, put out a fee for like $350 a week or something without the manager even knowing. So I rang him up and I said, you know, you want to be a good corporate citizen what are you doing? He had no idea that they'd done that. He soon squashed it, and we've got that facility back for $1 a year. I don't know how long it'll run on for, but we've got it back. It just shows sometimes the communications break down. And in this case, it has. Now, Mr Paul, as I said earlier, I'd spoken to Mr Paul. He wasn't getting anywhere with the properties branch. So I took it to someone that looked at that and sorted it out. So I think we're going forward on this, and I hope we can fulfil this project. You know, I don't think there's any point in navel gazing of just exactly what went wrong. We know what went wrong. We know what went wrong. We had assessments of doing high voltage power lines that came in at a fraction of what they were going to be. Now, there was a mistake made, and we all accept that. There was mistakes made. We did not have the easement for the high voltage. We couldn't get the authority to do the high voltage plan to bring it in. Another assumption was made it could be done any time, rather than the plant has got to wait for a shutdown to do it. There was all these complications. It wasn't just a simple matter. And I think Mr Paul did a good job of explaining a lot of those issues. So I don't think there's much point in going over this again and again to try and bash staff where they'd fallen down. We know there was none of us, you know, are without making mistakes in our lives.
Well, hang on, just to clarify, we did go to an independent organisation to do this for us. It wasn't staff. So it appeared that all right.
Right, okay, it's not our staff. Well, no. Okay, the people we employed let us down. Yeah.
The consulting firm that we employed went belly up halfway through the project.
That's correct.
And they were the ones, as you pointed out, said, "I just put the high voltage lines underground."
Exactly. They didn't have any understanding.
And they didn't do it. Right. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to make a suggestion for your information session. Could I suggest that councillors put their questions in writing, so they put forethought into the question and it doesn't turn into a simple fishing exhibition? Because I read these questions and some of these, they're worded, they're fishing. I'd like the questions to be real and well thought out. Thank you.
Yeah, well, so there's a suggestion that if you have complicated or complex questions, put them in writing, but there will be an information session. Okay? Last one. Don't ask again, so be there. Put the recommendation. All in favour. Against, carried. Move over to 17.1, notice of motion upgrade Station Street Barrel Bypass. Councillor Skinendrick.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I am going to just speak briefly.
No, you're going to move it. You're going to move it, and then if you get a seconder, you will speak to it.
The code of meeting practice, Mr Mayor, allows me to speak in order to get a seconder. If you're going
Councillor Scandrett.
So I'm going to move it, and now I'm going to speak briefly, which will only be a couple of sentences, to see if I get a seconder.
You will have half a minute. See if you can convince anybody.
Station Street has been on the books since 2013-14. It's been in our annual report and our budgets. It's not been delivered, and I am now suggesting that stage 2, which is covered in all of our own reports and so on, should proceed. And I'm seeking council's indulgence to have a debate on that.
Okay. Is there a seconder for Councillor Scandrett? Then you'll lapse for the want of a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, no, you will now move a motion. Councillor Whipper.
Mr Mayor, the motion that I would put is just that councillors receive an update on and in the form of an information session in relation to this matter. Thank you. And I do that because this is a project that I thought would be finished in the life of this council. I'm feeling less confident as the months tick by. I don't think stage 2, putting the cart before the horse, is not going to work, but I do think that we need to consolidate our thoughts and have some clarity around this, because I think the community are watching us. So I think it'd be in order to get an update and the relevant information that goes with this.
Well, there is information coming tonight in relation to this, but I don't see any problem with that. We may feel after tonight that it may not be...
I think it's important that we have a dedicated information session.
Okay, we will we'll do that. Is there... Put it... yeah, it's been seconded by Councillor McLaughlin. So, all right. That an information session be held in relation to the Station Street, an update, information in relation to updating councillors. Okay, all right, thank you. Happy with that? Put it. All in favour of Councillor Scandrett?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to support this. Jolly good. Fine, that moves us forward. Let's hear what's happening. We're going to hear more in close tonight about the status of a matter to do with Station Street, which is listed in the business paper there, which is the matter of car parking. And my concern with this project has always been the opportunity cost. And at now some $42 million in this project with
Councillor...
I'm in debate.
Councillor Scandrett.
In debate.
No, you might be in debate, but you give the truth.
I can demonstrate 42, it's in the accounts.
The truth
42.
Is the most important thing.
If you think it's not 42, Mr Mayor, say so.
Thank you. I do not believe that, Councillor Scandrett.
I'll take out 42. The cost of this project is at great cost to projects right across the Shire, Mr Mayor, that could otherwise proceed, because this is swallowing up a substantial part. It was originally costed at $9.5 million, which involved a $2 million...
Councillor Scandrett.
I'm in debate, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Scandrett, okay. I'll ask you to finish on that note.
I will finish on shortly. Thank you, Mr Mayor, just winding up. And that cost is now changed substantially, but it was $9.5 million, including a $7.5 million grant. Mr Mayor, it comes at a great opportunity cost to other projects across the Shire, so I think that information session will have that, and we'll see whether councillors still agree with the value of the project.
Thank you. Councillor House.
Yes, well, thank God that's opened up the debate, because I was trying to work out how I could get in on this one when you didn't second his motion to begin with. I cannot believe it. He's doing a Humpty Dumpty, like totally opposed to stage 1. Went out there, lobbied against the council, went on every form of media you can think of, denigrating this council, and that's what you did in effect. Trying to stop. Trying to stop.
Councillor Scandrett, we will just address the chair and not the person, please.
Malign. How about that one? That's not the fame. You maligned this council in terms of where we were going. And that really annoys me because continually you talk about an estimate that doesn't exist. You have no idea what you're talking about with respect to job cost on anything, let alone a job like that. So, you know damn well that the stage one, at the very minimum, we're talking 15, 16 million, and you keep quoting 9 and then a grant of 7.5, get your facts right. Now, this is just unacceptable, the line of attack that he's taken. All of a sudden he's in favour of stage 2, which is, putting the cart before the horse. So you do, I can't imagine it, trying to compare that with a major project somewhere where you do the end before the beginning, because that's what it is, with nowhere to go, nowhere to connect and achieve nothing. The people of this community want, effectively, and I'm going to say it, a bypass, because that's what it is. You can call it what you like, upgrade. People have had an absolute gutful of getting on that Station Street, whether it's AM or PM peak, and quite frank now, in the middle of the day, 2 p.m, anywhere between 12 and 2 p.m, don't go up there. Right, so you've got a couple of hours either side of the morning and PM peak where you can travel along Station Street and not be there for 20 minutes. I mean, the people have had enough. It's about getting on with it, and hopefully this one will tell us where we're going, because quite frank, major issues got to be brought to account at this stage. People in the public service, I'm sick of hearing what the Assistant General Manager keeps telling us about some person in the government that's just standing on it. One bureaucrat standing on ministers, this is the joke of it all, standing on state ministers not to make a decision on some land which is a swap. I'm not going to use the word that starts with I and ends with E, and it's a hell of a long one, but I'll say ineptitude, because that's what it is. Absolute ineptitude of a public servant that's holding this community to ransom in terms of a car park. And if you look at those car parks, which are involved with railways all the way to Sydney, they've had to provide them. But here, no, they're going to get this council to provide their car park for them. That's what it's all about, minimising cost to them. Enough is enough. We've got to pull out the big guns now and really go for it. Go for the Minister for Transport and the Premier, if necessary, to get an answer on this person in that department.
I love it when you get passionate, Councillor Halstead.
Mr Mayor, that's exactly what I was going to say. I love it. and I agree with everything that Councillor Halstead said. And you were at a meeting with the ministers, Mr Mayor, and the bureaucrat from State Rail. He was there, and they all went mute. Our local members didn't say a thing, didn't support us, didn't go anywhere. We got State Rail holding up a $15 million project, and surely the state government wants to get things rolling. Surely the federal government wants us to build things, state government wants us to build things. Well, Station Street, move it along. When you go to see the Premier about the vistas, bring this one along with you, Mr Mayor.
If only, eh? If only. Okay, the recommendation is there. That's been moved by Councillor Whipper and secondly Councillor McLaughlin. Information session with councillors in relation to the status of Station Street. Put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. 17.2, notice of rescission motion, motion 3/2019 DA9/0387, Seniors Housing Development, 3 Orchard Street, Colar Vale. We have a rescission motion. Councillor Whipper. Councillor Scandrett, sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I ask Ms Richardson if she has the...
Now, it's been moved and seconded, so but for seeing there was 3, who's seconding it, that it be rescinded? Councillor Whipper. So that the motion be rescinded. Councillor Scandrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have prepared a statement of the reasons that are appropriate, and I've taken advice from my fellow councillors who have supported me on this rescission motion on that. And the reason we've gone for a fairly detailed bunch of reasons, if the matter is refused and the the rescission motion gets up, is simply because there is so much interest in this particular matter. And I'll tell you why, Mr. Mayor. The village of Collovale is quite unique in the Shire because it's not a main town. It has one shop. It is essentially a rural village, which is not particularly reflected in the reports that we've seen from staff. But the owners of Collovale see that quite clearly. They like their no curbs. They like their leafy outlooks and Australian bush. They like the fact that it's a very, if you wish, it's a slow village, if I can put it to you that way, and it moves at a slow rural pace. People meet down at the village hall and down at the old railway station, and it's a place where they know their neighbours. And whilst people like to stay there as they get older, they don't want to see the essential character of the village changed. And that essential character is predominantly single-storey, tree-lined, uncurbed, ungutted streets with a spattering of small two-storey, three-bedroom or four-bedroom homes around. Our own report and our own staff recognise it's only a handful of two-storey homes. But this is a building of 10 bedrooms. It's a building of 5 kitchens, 5 lounges, multiple bathrooms. It's 2 flats of 2 bedrooms and 2 flats of 3, has a small lift in it, and it takes up a fair bit of the frontage of the block. It's not sympathetic to the streetscape of Orchard Street, let alone Wattle Street, let alone the whole of Collovale, Mr. Mayor, because it's, well, as the Speaker last meeting called it, a block of flats. And I picked that up. It is a block of flats. It looks like a block of flats. It's got a sawtooth style roofing to it. It spans most of the front boundary of the block. It's visible from Wattle Street in no uncertain terms over a skillion-roofed 2-bedroom 5-row house, and from all over that area. And whilst it's claimed this is going to deliver seniors housing, that could be done, as the supporters of this rescission motion, we've all pointed out, by delivering a one-storey solution and using the planning advantages of that SEP to argue a suitable floor space. So we could end up with, let's say, 6 or 7 bedrooms on the ground floor in a villa-style development.
Thank you,
this
Councillor
proceeds.
Scandrett. Any other speakers against the rescission motion? Okay, then speaker for the rescission motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Look, I'll support this on the grounds, basically, of, and I've heard from the staff, and we do know that a lot of what the state government imposes on us, Mr. Mayor, under the SEP, that will make it compliant to a certain extent. But one of the things that the state government did put in place for seniors living was that there had to be close to amenities. And I don't think this ticks the box. Just to say there's a bus service that can take you into a town where you can find a doctor, go to a bank, do other things, I don't think is sufficient. I think aged residents living in a village that hasn't got the amenities that are provided. I mean, I just throw out the scenario. Imagine if the bus company decides to discontinue this service because, well, it's not patronised enough. Where does that leave the seniors? Where does that... So that box was ticked to say it does comply. As long as there's a bus that can take aged people in to shop and go to the doctor and go to the chemist, it could be discontinued. Then what are that doesn't meet the criteria, does it? So just on that ground alone, I mean, I've opposed seniors, you know I've opposed these because it's tantamount to high density development in low density areas. That's what it's all about. Sure, we need to put in DCPs that provide for those, but if we haven't got a DCP, we should have DCPs, and hopefully our planning staff go through that criteria of looking at our villages and our towns to see where this qualifies. And as Councillor House said, it's only a guide, but we haven't even got a guide. Our staff told us they had to use the SEP as a guide to get this through. And the SEP, as we know, can't apply in water catchment area. So the arguments there are it was just used as a guide. The other concern I have, Mr Mayor, is how do we ever police this? How do we ever police that there are seniors living there? Do you just need one? They move in once, buy it, and then we don't follow up? How do we ever police it? How do we ever know it's really used for that intention purposes? I know it's a very good return for the developers because you can get a lot of people in there and a lot of units. Now, I don't know if people move to the Southern Highlands to live in Cola Vale in, retirement living or seniors living. I doubt that very much. I really doubt that. If people want to downsize, they move to the centre of a town where they can walk freely to shops and amenities.
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. Councillor Halstead.
Yes, I'm speaking for the rescission motion, so I'm not going to give it all away, but one, I didn't second that second lot of rubbish that's written on the board there. I don't know where it come from. That's the issues elaborated upon in section 4.15. Yeah, well, I've got more. Great. Well, I don't know how yours go with this, but yeah, so we'll look at that later on. But if ever I've seen a development that's out of character with an existing neighbourhood, and it's a rural neighbourhood, it's not an urban one. It's an urban part of a rural area, if you like, so it's a rural neighbourhood. And the density is far above anything adjoining. To me, it looks like a sawtooth industrial building, but that's only my opinion. I could be wrong. 2-storey, I think, puts it out of context with most of the other places in the town. I think there's 3 or 4, certainly not 8, someone quoted, 3 or 4 other places that might be 2-storey, which they can be if they're a residential dwelling. Permissible. Definitely 2 stories is permissible. But here we have something that the community has expressed very clearly they don't want. And after all, when you look at that 4.15, it's always been there. It was 79C before. Public input, public opinion. Is it in the interest of the local community? What's the effect on the amenity of the environment? Drastic, I would suggest, in terms of change of land use, which is in absolute conflict with anything around it. No matter where you go within probably 300 metres, there's nothing like it anywhere. The maximum you might find is a house with a secondary dwelling on it. A granny flat or whatever you like. But based just upon the input we got and very thorough submission from ratepayers, it's very clearly not in the public interest.
Thank you, Councillor Halstead. Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look,
No, I've given the floor to Councillor Nelson. Then if it's the wrong copy, then...
What you've been typing up all council meeting and it's wrong.
I think Ms Richardson has to just grab it off her email.
Councillor Nelson. Councillor Scandra, please. Nobody interrupted you. Councillor Nelson.
Look, Mr Mayor, the objector has emailed all the councillors and he's given a detailed reasons why it shouldn't go ahead. So I'd thank the objector for his time and effort that he's put into it. It does appear that the DCP is deficient and council has to fix that up. So, we're going there. The developer raised a few issues and one of them was the exhibition period, stating that because it was advertised over the Christmas period that it was invalid. So we've checked with the staff and they were taking submissions right up to the cut-off point for before the application was submitted to council. Also, it was advertised for over a number of weeks. We tend to do that over the Christmas period. So he's asking for invalid public notification. I don't think that will stand up. Also, the approval for seniors with disability in a fire-prone land, no bushfire evacuation plan. Apparently that was checked off by the Rural Fire Service, and that was spelt out in the report. The objector said that they're taking on the Department of Water, so possibly they should be challenging the Rural Fire Service as well. The other points that he raised was about the car parking does not comply. So, and referred to 2890.6. The advice received there that there is in fact a minor impact on the car parking. It was incorrect, but that will not absolve the application. So it doesn't fail there either. He also then referred to the Opal Towers and Mascot Towers as some examples, and I thought that was using a long bow. He also referred to the height of the building, saying that didn't comply either. And the staff have said that it does comply, and we're talking about 300 millimetres of the skillion at the top. So that won't stand up in court. He also referred to clause 33 of the senior SEP, neighbourhood amenity, and to an extent I do agree with him there, because point A said fails on character, quality and identity. Point C is reasonable neighbourhood amenity and appropriate residential character, reduced bulk, overshadowing and heights. I agree, and I agree with that point, but I don't not agree with the development. But the objector is actually taking it, he started a Class 4 application, so the residents out there are moving ahead with that. I don't want to spend 200,000 of council's ratepayers' money, and I'm challenged by what Councillor Whipper says, the principle versus the dollars. So in this case, I'm leaning towards the dollars. So thanks, Mr. Mayor. We should have had 5 minutes, I think.
Councillor Whipper.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor. In this instance, I'm leaning more towards the principle than the dollars, and I support the rescission motion. There are a number of councillors that went along to the community hall out there at Carlo Vale and listened very closely to the concerns of the residents, the passion, and their love for their village. And I think that that we owe an element of respect to those people and their opinion. They live there. At the moment, we're asking community members to send in photographs of the things they believe are, sort of build up the character of the Shire. I'm sure that a double-storey seniors development in Carlo Vale won't be one of those pictures. If it is, I think I'll move out of the Shire, because very clearly this really is just not characteristic of the Carlo Vale village. And Mr. Baston raised a number of really good points that I think we should take on board and show, I think, some support, to the residents that we represent, and encourage them to maintain their passion for their villages, because it's what makes us unique and different than the urban areas to our north. So, councillors, I'm asking you to support this rescission motion and support the residents of Carlo Vale. I think that's what it comes down to. That's the decision. If it's dollars or principles, I think the principle of supporting those people that elect us to be here and advocate on their behalf is more important than whether or not this may have to be defended in court. I think it's important we show our support in this instance.
Thank you, Councillor Whipper. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the almost 3 years I've been on council, I've probably voted against staff's recommendation on 2 occasions only. I've always maintained that if a development, and after reading the reports that are very comprehensive, if a development compliant, that I'll always support it. Some of the things that have been mentioned, Councillor McLaughlin mentioned a lot of flats, there's 4, a lot of units, there's 4. In any way of interpreting, that's not a lot. Public transport, we all heard Mr Wilton demonstrate that the public transport is very active in Cola Vale within 400 metres of the proposed development. That's not an issue. Double-storey buildings, there's 4 in the vicinity of the new development within 600 metres. There's one directly opposite, there's one at 25 and 23 Orchard Street at the end, and directly across in Myrtle Street there's another significant 2-storey building at number 28 Myrtle Street. They do exist, and they exist very close to this development. The objector mentioned, I'm sure he mentioned, he certainly did in some of the correspondence he sent to me in regard to his concern about seniors housing in an integrated development, is an integrated development of bushfire-prone land. The report clearly shows that the RFS has correctly provided integrated approval under Section 100B of the Rural Fire Act 1997. R2 determines whether this is permissible or not, and it quite clearly shows in Council's report that it does. For senior housing in this zone is permissible and compliant. Interestingly, in the north, there is no DCP in the northern villages for seniors living. We all accept that, but the DCP in the north for the northern villages does allow 2-storey buildings. Very clearly, submissions, it was mentioned by the objector, he was concerned about the period that this thing was shown to the public. It went for the full 28 days, yeah, albeit over the Christmas period. Then it was allowed to drag out for another 2 months, 3 months in total, and other submissions after the 28 days were, and we heard that this afternoon as well, they were accepted. So I won't be supporting the rescission motion. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Before I give you your right of reply, Councillor Whipper, I'll be speaking. I'll be not supporting the rescission motion. There was a point raised by Councillor McLaughlin in relation to transport. Seems to be the major issue that he's following. And 2 things: don't get old in Cola Vale because you won't be able to get out. Well, that's just not. I think that's a bit far-fetched to say that there's no transport. There must be, I would suggest, a relatively I don't say large, but a section of the community of Cola Vale that are over 55. But they seem to be able to move around the Shire pretty well, I think. And I would hate to think that Councillor McLaughlin is putting everybody in walking frames in relation to who's going to move in there. That people do have the right to live where they want. And if I were in a walking frame, I don't think I'd be wanting to buy one of these units. So I agree with you there. But if I was 55 and wanted to be able to walk out, close the door and not have to worry about a garden or amenities, then it might be very appealing. So the comment about how are we going to police it, I can only but strongly disagree. We have a number of we know we have a large number of senior developments in the Shire. Do we go and police them all and say, are you over 55? We have them within a couple of 100 metres of the Pepperfield, which I went and opened the men's shed for last week. All seniors. But nobody, that's the rules. And it's the body corporate who has to uphold the rules. Otherwise, the body corporate is in breach. So, do I see this being a problem if the state government had not changed the legislation to allow seniors living in Cola Vale? It would be an illegal development. But it's not an illegal development application. It is got the hands placed on the head of it by the state government by changing the legislation. And by changing the legislation, we have an issue with that which we have found out in other areas of the Shire, which we have to work on and work with. So I will not be supporting the rescission motion. Councillor Scandrett, you've spoken. You moved it? Yes, he did. You're right to reply. Sorry, I apologise. I thought it was Councillor Whipper.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, could I just ask before I start, before the clock goes on, we push up...
No, the clock's starting.
Mr Mayor, I'm waiting for the reasons for refusal, which now have been moved there and are correct. I'll just address those. Thank you. Yes, well, should the rescission motion get up, Mr Paul, the reasons I put there go to the very heart of this discussion, and they relate to the fact that this is, in any way you look at it, it is barely slid through. In fact, there's have to be a number of exemptions in here, even the car parking, even the height of the building.
Councillor Scandrett, do not tell mistruths. You were told today that the amount of private amenity and landscaping takes up that area will be used to compensate that because one car park was too narrow.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for confirming that. Now, what I'm saying is that this is out of character for this street. The speakers supporting this rescission motion have all said it is a large box that goes literally from one boundary to the other, where across the road you've got a ski chalet with a couple of bedrooms up in the roof underneath dormer windows. Quite a different thing. This is a streetscape which is characterised by single-storey, 2, 3 and 4 bedroom homes. It is what the residents of Carlisle Vale want to keep. And the supporters of this rescission motion are not against the seniors living, Mr Mayor and councillors, because we've said there that the applicant be invited to put in a proposal for a single-storey seniors. And I don't know what form that might take, but it might get 5, 6, 7 bedrooms there in maybe a villa style. Now, real estate agents tell me that this 3-bedroom unit in this development may be $450,000 to $500,000. Hardly affordable seniors housing, right? It might be suitable to have ground floor, cheaper accommodation under our revised invitation there. Some of the things that here, I'll just go through them, everyone, doesn't address the issue. I've added actually the third one there. The council addressed the issue of seniors housing in the forthcoming planning Northern Villages DCP review with a view to developing suitable guidelines. Mr Mayor, that would take out some of the holes in this. The reasons this doesn't comply: it doesn't comply with the local planning instrument, it doesn't comply with the character of the street, it doesn't comply in the impacts of the development, including environmental impacts on both the natural and built environments, and social and economic impacts in the locality are not consistent with the local area and planning. That's what the speakers have been saying tonight. Now, the site is not suitable, nor the location, for 2-storey development of this bulk and scale.
Thank you, Councillor Scandrett. All right, so we have the motion as put by Councillor Scandrett. All in favour of that, please raise your hand. Councillors Whipper, Halstead, McLaughlin and Scandrett. Those against? Councillors Nelson, Andrews, Markwart and Gare. As using the status quo as was passed last week of this development, I use my vote to vote against the rescission motion, so the rescission motion is defeated. We now move on to 17.3, page 141, notice of motion, clean up and rubbish removal of Station Street Barrel.
I think this should be... Yep. I think this should be withdrawn, because if you can make out what that means, I can't. Right? I don't know what it means from one to the other, so I think it should be just withdrawn. It's nebulous.
Yep.
I mean,
move that it be noted.
It wasn't what was put to me. I think we now know what it is, but we should just get rid of it.
I know what you're trying to do, but Councillor Halstead has made a point, and perhaps it be noted, and if you're not happy with the discussion that is going to happen in closed, you can resubmit it. Or deferred. It be deferred.
No, I got the light.
Hang on, Councillor Nelson. Yes, there's a light on.
Are we in debate or question?
No, we're asking.
Question?
I'm asking. Councillor Halstead is asking whether the movers of this would defer it.
Well, defer because what cost?
Yeah. Well, okay. What I'll do before we get into debate, I'll ask Councillor Andrews. No. Just you've got the light. Everybody turn the lights off until except Councillor Andrews. Thank you.
This is, I think we all get the drift here. This is more than happy to defer it because we're going to have a discussion after, providing it hangs in there. It's directly related to Station Street. It's an area that needs to be cleaned up. It would be an ideal time to start Station Street now. That was what it was about. So
right.
We defer it. I'm happy to.
Mr Mayor.
Okay, we're happy to defer. Question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does council own this land yet that we want to clear up the undergrowth on?
It's called a road.
No.
Yes, we do.
I believe it's part of a lot that we're trying to acquire.
No.
We do own it?
We own it.
And do we have to get any permissions to go ahead with this? And
No, we own it.
And would we mark so that to reduce any debate on this? Would we
No, we own it.
mark any of the undergrowth you propose to remove, or trees, prior to removing them? That's my question.
No, we don't. We've got a recommendation on the books have been deferred.
I'll move that.
Move that it be deferred. Second to Councillor Andrews. Put it. All in favour. Those against, carried. Right. Now, would somebody like to move that we go into closed committee? Move Councillor Nelson. Second to Councillor McLaughlin. Thank you, the council watchers of old. We can tell